Breaking down everything that happened in Munich, Secretary Rubio's standing ovation speech, the Democrats who also went there to make a name for themselves and didn't do quite as well. We're going to talk about Eileen, the American-born skier competing for China. We're going to talk about woke lawfare. We're going to talk about a lot of different things in a very special lightning round episode of 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
First, Secretary Rubio went to Munich, representing the Trump administration, to speak on their current views about our transatlantic relationships. You'll remember last year, Vice President J.D. Vance went representing the administration and turned a lot of heads with very, very stark words about the divergence in our shared values with Europe on issues like free speech and others. This year, Secretary Rubio went and shared a lot of the same messages, but actually got a very different response.
We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization.
It's very, very rare that you can go and get a standing ovation among European leaders, but also get praise from Republicans back home who have been skeptical of our relationship with Europe. We're going to talk a lot more about this tomorrow and some of those underlying issues. But at the same time, a number of Democrats also went to Munich to try and brandish their own foreign policy credentials. One of them was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who had a few different dust-ups we're going to touch on very quickly here. First, she was asked about our relationship with Taiwan and China.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is this is, of course, a very long-standing.
Now, some watching that exchange might say that she actually makes Kamala Harris look like a foreign policy scholar. Another dust-up was when she was trying to mock Secretary Rubio's speech, talking about his invocation of Western themes.
Was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain.
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word.
I am a big fan of Mexico and of even the history of Mexico with the Aztecs, the native people who built the pyramids of Teotihuacan. But the Western influence in horses very clearly came from Spain, who settled in Mexico, not necessarily the indigenous people or the formerly enslaved people. So a lot of people had some thoughts and commentary for AOC on that. But the other issue that I thought got a lot of interesting reaction was when she invoked genocide.
Personally, that the idea of completely unconditional aid, no matter what one does not make sense. I think it enabled a genocide in Gaza.
Now remember, she's speaking in Munich to European leaders, many of whom represent countries that lived through the actual Holocaust. And so when they hear this representative who's clearly out of her depth invoking themes like that, I think that they've probably got to feel a little bit uncomfortable and think this is just another sort of internet sensation who doesn't know anything about history. She also doesn't exactly know where Venezuela is in terms of the equator.
It is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator.
But AOC wasn't the only person to invoke Holocaust themes. Not missing another opportunity to grandstand on the international stage was Gavin Newsom.
But I want to remember all those images of masked men, the secret police, something familiar in Germany. Those first images came out of my state.
Another Democrat that made the trip over was Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Now, she turned heads when she was asked a question and had this response.
On Ukraine, what does victory look like?
Ambassador? No, please. I'd love to hear your answer. it is. The two that I am on the panel with are much more steeped in foreign policy than a governor is. But I do think that.
So first, why are you there if you don't want to talk about foreign policy and if you don't feel like you have foreign policy credentials? This is the Munich Security Conference. Nobody's forcing you to be there. And if you are deferring to AOC to talk about foreign policy, things aren't going very well. And so again, nobody really knows why the Democrats were there apart from brandishing their credentials. But Hillary Clinton also made some news while she was there.
He has betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. He's betrayed.
What I think Trump is doing in America, I think it is reaction for something for some policies that really went too far from the regular people, too far from reality. So we saw the cancel culture. We saw the woke revolution.
I think the optics of Democrats going to Europe and lecturing Eastern European leaders on American wokeism is a very, very bizarre look. Over to the Olympics. By now, you've likely heard about athlete Eileen Gu. Now, Eileen Gu's story is very interesting. She is American born and raised. She has a Chinese mother, but she was raised and trained in the United States and attends Stanford University. Her father is also an American. And up until just a few years ago, she competed for the United States. However, she made a very surprising decision to switch teams and represent the Chinese Communist Party. And the Wall Street Journal has some reason why. The hidden government funding of China's American-born Olympic star. We know that the Chinese Communist Party has paid her millions of dollars in endorsement deals to switch, and she has actually taken some political stances against the American government throughout her time. But she hasn't had anything to say about Uyghur genocide, about slave camps, about the Chinese Communist Party and their role in COVID or anything else. So NBC and other Olympic properties, as they've promoted her, have gotten a lot of pushback for being a part of a Chinese propaganda operation. We'll have more on this tomorrow. Last week, Keith Ellison was in the Senate. He was there primarily to talk about ICE operations in the state. That's likely the reason that he accepted the invitation to come and testify. However, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri wanted to talk about the fraud issue.
Minnesota Keith Ellison, AG, accepted campaign donations from individuals linked to the $250 million COVID fraud scheme after they were in your office. The donations came on December 20th.
Sir,
you met with them on December the 11th, and on January 20th, the FBI knocked over their headquarters.
No.
That's the sequence of events here.
No, it's not.
You've been right at the center of this fraud thing from the beginning, and you've enabled it. And, sir, you should resign.
And, sir, you should resign. I was thinking the same thing about you.
You should resign.
Clearly, that issue's not going away anytime soon, but it might also get worse before it gets better. Last week, Tim Walz announced $10 million in forgivable loans at zero interest to Minnesota small businesses who can claim that they were impacted by ICE. So again, forgivable loans to small businesses. That sounds a whole lot like what led to $9 billion in Somali fraud in the state of Minnesota. No, we have a lot of interest in highlighting how the left is using levers of power to carry out their will. A new report from Alliance for Consumers highlights how they're using Lawfare to try and push their political agendas through the legal system. In Fox News, DEI climate agenda advanced through progressive-backed lawsuits, new report claims. We're going to talk about this quite a bit more tomorrow, but this is an issue to watch as Democrats have continued to see some of their popular pet issues on climate change, on racial quotas in the workplace, lose in popularity. They're taking that fight to courts, where they have well-funded lawsuits in states around the country to promote those issues. Last week, we talked about the fight over voter ID and the fact that Democrats, once again, are kind of strangely in the wrong side of an 80-20 issue. One person who has been very visibly engaged in this is former President Barack Obama, but he's doing it on behalf of a left-wing dark money group. This is Redistricting Action, which is a project of Hans-Jörg Wyss, the Swiss billionaire and foreign pervert who we've talked about quite a bit. Barack Obama is using foreign dark money to fight against voter ID in the United States. That sounds like a fairly big issue that we're going to get into more tomorrow. Bloomberg reports this. California getting American energy routed through the Bahamas. And if you look at this helpful map, you'll see how that's working. Energy from states like Texas is having to flow through the Bahamas and then all the way around to California. This is Gavin Newsom leadership to a T. Energy costs are rising because their rules and regulations against energy have made it so that energy companies have to route through the Bahamas just to get oil and gas to California. Meanwhile, Gavin has chased out multiple refineries that actually had made energy so much cheaper, which is part of the reason that Californians are looking at $8 gas this year. Congrats to Gavin. Expect to see more people renting up those U-Hauls to get away from the policies of Governor U-Haul. But the other California story, this from Politico. Bonta sues to block Trump funding threat over student forced outing law. So Bonta is the Attorney General of California. He is using California taxpayer dollars to fight, and they're calling it a forced outing law, which Politico has taken a lot of heat over because it's not a forced outing law. It is a law that blocks teachers from keeping secrets from parents about their children at school. California has laws to allow teachers to block information from getting to parents about what their kids are doing at school. This goes back to the California theory that teachers know better than parents what's good for their own children. And again, if you're a Californian who is seeing those $8 gas prices, you can't rebuild your house. You're seeing billions of dollars wasted on high-speed rail, on homelessness that's only getting worse, as Barack Obama called out. We'll flag that one tomorrow. And you're seeing that your tax dollars are also funding a lawsuit to help teachers and government workers in public schools keep secrets from parents. I am sure you are more than a little bit frustrated. You can't make it up segment on this lightning round episode. You may have heard about the sewage spill in the Potomac. We've read that already 250 million gallons of raw sewage has flown into the Potomac after a crisis with a pipe, and that it will take maybe as much as 9 months to actually fix the problem, at which time we could see up to 1 billion gallons of raw sewage flow into the Potomac, which will flow through the District of Columbia, past Georgetown, and eventually deep into Virginia, going as far as places like Stafford, Woodbridge, etc. This is crazy. The craziest part of it is that we haven't heard hardly anything from local leaders in Virginia, Maryland, or Washington, D.C. about the dangers of this. You might remember that 9 or 10 years ago, a girl who was in a canoe had an open cut on her leg. It touched the water in the Potomac and she died because the water was already so dirty. Now add in 250 million or up to 1 billion gallons in human waste. This is incredibly dangerous, but also it's going to smell terrible. So this is one more example of how people in these big blue cities are trapped by the failures of left-wing governance that act like it's no big deal. And eventually they will throw somebody under the bus. They'll probably try and find a way to say this is President Trump's fault. Meanwhile, people are in actual danger here, and that is crazy. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in to this lightning round. We will have a full episode tomorrow and the next day, getting into all the crazy news happening around the world. Have a great day.